Okay, so the first thing we need to do when we've identified a knowledge gap and then want to fill in that gap is come up with a research idea or research question that will help us fill in that knowledge gap. And so really, the research idea is the main question you're trying to answer with your study. So you can think of it kind of as the focal point of your study. And like I've mentioned several times already, this research idea builds off of our previously identified knowledge gap. So that's good because we've already done that first identifying knowledge gap step, right? So we'll build on that and take the next step. So in this puzzle piece analogy we've used before, all these existing pieces are the known knowledge, and what we're filling in here is what's currently unknown. And our research idea will address that. So for me, when I think about these kinds of things, they're kind of abstract topics, and so I like to have concrete examples that help me understand. This is an example knowledge gap that I introduced in the previous proposal module. This is an actual knowledge gap that I have used to come up with projects in my research lab. So for this part, the red part is again showing us what we already know. So this is the known based on previous research, and the green is what we still don't know. So this is our knowledge gap. And so what we can do is based on that knowledge gap, and actually let me go back and read that gap for you. So the gap is that we haven't yet studied the microbial contribution to heat stress response in red abalone. That's what hasn't been done yet. So that's what we want our research idea to address. So what we can do from that then is formulate a research idea that will address that knowledge gap and that also is specific. So I'll explain what I mean by that as I go through this example here. So this is a research idea that again is pulled from one of my actual proposals. So based on the knowledge gap that I set up in the introduction, and I will also talk later in these modules about how to write your introduction and frame your whole study. So I set up my knowledge gap, and from that, my research idea as stated in my proposal is that, quote, this research will detail microbiome characteristics related to warm El Nino conditions in juvenile red abalone Haliotis rufescens. And so I have a couple things here highlighted or written in purple, and that's to illustrate what I mean by these specifics. So when we're writing a research idea, we want to include some specifics to make it more concrete and more testable for the rest of our proposal. So in this research idea, what I have done is provide specifics, first of all, related to what kind of heat stress conditions I'm talking about. So in the knowledge gap before, I said the microbial contribution to heat stress response hasn't been studied. If we're talking about heat stress response, there are a lot of different possible variables or ways to test that. It could be a really prolonged heat stress. It could be a short heat stress but a really high temperature. So there are different ways you can get about that. And so what I've done in this research idea is be specific in the sense that I explain that I'm specifically interested in heat stress that is associated with these warm El Nino conditions. If you haven't heard of El Nino events before, they're basically these warm water events that happen along the coast in California here in the Pacific Ocean. And what happens is they have these really warm water temperatures that then cause a lot of detrimental effects for many organisms, including the red abalone. So in this proposal that I wrote, my research idea is specifically wanting to understand how the microbiome of red abalone responds to these El Nino conditions. So that's one specific I've listed here. The other one is that I specifically stated that I was interested in looking at juvenile red abalone. And there are a couple reasons for that. Logistically, I actually can't do studies with adult red abalone. If you've ever seen how big an adult red abalone can get, you should look it up. They can get like dinner plate size. They're huge. My aquarium, I could have like one per tank, which wouldn't be good for a study. So juvenile red abalone are more feasible. But also from a research standpoint, juvenile red abalone are actually some of the most susceptible to high temperatures and heat stress. So in abalone farms along the coast here in California, where they raise abalone to sell to restaurants for food and whatnot, the juveniles are actually the ones that they see with the highest mortality rates. So in this research idea, I'm specifying that I want to work specifically with juvenile abalone. So hopefully that gives you an idea of the general level of specificity that we're looking for with research ideas and general research questions. And go ahead after watching this video now and go to Canvas, and I have a little graded survey, quote unquote, quiz for you to practice writing these research ideas and questions based on some of the data we worked with in lab.